Every Dynasty content creator you've ever watched has thrown out terms like RAS Score, Dominator Rating, Breakout Age, and they often never actually explain what any of it means. Well, today, we're fixing that. I'm going to break down every single metric that serious Dynasty players use to evaluate rookies, what it actually measures, why it matters, and what the numbers look like for a guy who's going to be a star versus a guy who's going to be a bust. By the end of this video, you'll never hear these terms again without knowing exactly what it means. Let's get into it. I'm the FFAI guy, where I use data and AI analysis to give you a real edge in your Dynasty leagues. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe because we have more content coming very soon, and you're going to want to understand everything we covered today before that drops. We're going to cover this in 4 sections. First, athleticism metrics from the NFL Combine, because before a single player takes an NFL snap, these numbers already tell us a massive amount about their potential. Second, college production stats, which are honestly more important than most people realize. Third, landing spot factors, which can make or break a Dynasty value completely regardless of how good the player is. And fourth, we'll bring it all together and talk about how these metrics work differently depending on the position. Section 1, athleticism metrics. Every spring, hundreds of college football players head to Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine.agent. They run, jump, lift, and get measured in every way imaginable. For Dynasty Fantasy, a handful of those measurements are genuinely predictive. Here are the ones that matter. The first and most important athleticism metric is the RAS Score, Relative Athletic Score. Here's why I love this number. Instead of giving you 10 different raw combine measurements and making you figure out what they mean, RAS takes all of them: the 40 time, the vertical jump, the broad jump, the short shuttle, the 3-cone, the bench press, height, weight, wingspan, and it combines them into a single score from 0 to 10. 0 means you're the worst athlete at your position in recorded combine history. 10 means you're literally the best, and it's relative. So a 9.5 for a tight end is compared to every tight end ever measured, not to wide receivers. A score of 8 or above is very good. Above 9 is elite. Above 9.5 is generational athleticism. Now here's the key thing about RAS for Dynasty. It's not a ceiling predictor, it's a floor predictor. A player with elite RAS doesn't always become a star, but a player with elite RAS almost never becomes a complete bust, because their physical tools give them multiple paths to contributing on an NFL roster. You can find RAS scores for every prospect going back to 1987 for free at rastracker.com. There's the Mount under 90 to Superhorde and Deagle. Next, the 40-yard dash. Everyone knows this one, but most people misuse it. The mistake is treating it like a simple faster is better number. What you actually want to know is, does this player's speed create a real on-field advantage at their position? For wide receivers, sub 4.40 is where you start getting genuinely excited. Sub 4.35 is where you have a legitimate deep threat. But here's what people miss. A receiver who runs a 4.52 but has a 4.05 short shuttle is actually a scarier route runner than a 4.35 guy with average agility, because Dynasty value is built on consistent target volume, and that comes from creating separation at all levels of the route tree, not just burning corners deep. For running backs, speed matters even more because their Dynasty window is shorter. You want a guy who can turn a small crease into a 50-yard touchdown 10 years into his career. Sub 4.45 is the threshold. Sub 4.38 is where you have elite breakaway potential. For tight ends, sub 4.65 is very good. If a tight end runs under 4.55, that's a special athlete at the position, and it changes everything about how defenses have to defend him. The vertical jump directly measures explosive lower body power, which translates to how high a player can get off the ground to catch a football. For Dynasty purposes, think about this. Red zone targets are among the most valuable fantasy plays in the game. A receiver or tight end who can go up and get a football at the highest point of their jump above a defensive back is going to score touchdowns in situations where an average athlete gets a pass broken up. The threshold at wide receiver is around 38 inches for above average. 40 inches or more is elite. Some people sleep on this number because it feels less football specific than the 40 or the shuttle, but contested catchability is one of the stickiest skills in the NFL. Players who have it keep producing even when everything else around them is average. The short shuttle and the 3-cone drill are the 2 agility tests, and for Dynasty they matter more than most people think, especially for wide receivers and tight ends. Here's why. The NFL game is built on the intermediate route tree. Crossing routes, curls, comebacks, option routes, these require sudden direction changes at full speed. The short shuttle measures lateral explosion. Can you stop and go in the opposite direction in a fraction of a second? The 3-cone measures the ability to change direction around a fixed point. It's the closest combine drill to actually running a route. For wide receivers, a short shuttle under 4.10 seconds is elite. For tight ends, under 4.30 is excellent. Players who test well in both agility drills tend to have longer Dynasty careers because route running ages better than speed. Section 2, college production. This is where Dynasty evaluation gets really interesting, because these are the metrics that separate a guy who just looked good because his team was great from a guy who was genuinely carrying his offense. Let's go through the big ones. Dominator Rating is my personal favorite college production metric, and if you only learn one number from this entire video, make it this one. Here's what it measures. What percentage of your team's total receiving yards and touchdowns did you account for? So if your offense produced 4,000 receiving yards and 30 receiving touchdowns, and you personally had 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns, your Dominator Rating is around 36%. That's elite. Here's why this matters so much for Dynasty. It tells you whether a player was the undisputed alpha on his offense or whether he was one piece of a talented group. NFL teams pay for alpha receivers. Fantasy managers pay for alpha receivers. A player who dominated his college team's offense, who the quarterback looked for on third down, who lined up against the best corner every week, is projecting a skill set that translates directly to target share in the NFL. The threshold to get genuinely excited is 30% or above. Players who hit 35% or more in a major conference are extremely rare and almost always become at minimum a reliable NFL contributor. PlayerProfiler.com has this metric for every prospect going back years, and it is completely free to access. Breakout Age might be the most debated metric in Dynasty, and for good reason. When you understand what it's actually measuring, it's incredibly powerful. Breakout Age is defined as the age at which a player first achieved a 20% or higher Dominator Rating. Why does the age matter? Because it tells you how long it took them to dominate their competition. Think about it this way. If a wide receiver is 18 years old, a true freshman, and he's already the most targeted player on a major college offense, that means he was physically and mentally ready to dominate adult athletes 2 years before most of his peers even got to college. That kind of early dominance almost always signals elite football instincts and rare physical tools, because no 18-year-old should be able to do that against 22-year-old seniors unless they are genuinely special. The Dynasty threshold to get excited is a breakout age under 20. Under 19 is elite. A breakout age above 21.5 is a yellow flag, not disqualifying, but it means you're looking at a player who needed time to catch up, which often means slower NFL development. The players with the lowest breakout ages in Dynasty history tend to have the longest and most productive careers. Target market share is exactly what it sounds like. What percentage of your team's total passing attempts were thrown your way? This is slightly different from Dominator Rating because it's purely about volume, not efficiency. A player can have a huge Dominator Rating by turning a moderate target share into a massive number of yards and touchdowns. But target market share specifically tells you, did the quarterback trust you enough to throw to you on a third of all passing plays? In Dynasty, target share is the most direct college proxy for NFL target volume projection. The number we look for is 30% or above for wide receivers. A college WR commanding 30% of his team's targets means the quarterback was going to him every single drive on first down, on third down, in the red zone, in 2-minute drills. That kind of QB trust doesn't develop overnight, and it tells us the receiver has the route running, the hands, and the reliability to be a true number one. For tight ends, any target share above 20% in college is exceptional because most college offenses use their tight ends primarily as blockers. Yards per route run, YPRR, is an efficiency metric that answers a very specific question. Every single time this player ran a route, how many yards did they produce on average? This is powerful because it removes the volume element and measures pure per play value. A receiver might have 1,400 yards, but if he ran 800 routes to get there, that's 1.75 yards per route. Decent, but not elite. Another receiver might have 1,100 yards on 450 routes, which works out to 2.44 yards per route. That second player is dramatically more efficient even though his raw yardage looks worse. For Dynasty, we use YPRR to separate system receivers from genuine playmakers. A system receiver gets their numbers because their team throws a ton of short passes to the flat and they rack up yards after catch. A true playmaker creates separation on demand and produces big plays at a high rate regardless of the scheme. The threshold at wide receiver is 2.0 yards per route run in college. Above 2.3 is very good. Above 2.5 is elite. This metric is available on PFF College for the major prospects. Section 3, landing spot. Here's the honest truth about landing spot. It can completely override everything we just talked about. You can have the most athletically gifted, college-dominant prospect in the class, and if he lands in the wrong situation, his dynasty value gets destroyed for the first 2 to 3 years of his career. Conversely, a mid-tier prospect who lands in a perfect situation can immediately become a top fantasy contributor. Here's how to evaluate it. The first thing I look at after the draft is target vacancies. Every NFL team throws the ball a certain number of times per season, somewhere between 500 and 650 passing attempts on average. Those attempts get distributed to specific players. When a player retires, gets cut, or signs somewhere else in free agency, those targets become available for someone new to claim. What you want to find as a dynasty manager is a rookie who just walked into a team with a huge number of available targets and no established competition to claim them. A team that just lost its top 2 wide receivers and didn't replace them in free agency might have 180 to 220 targets sitting unclaimed. If a talented rookie walks into that situation, he could be a top 24 fantasy wide receiver as a rookie purely based on opportunity before he even takes a snap. The resource I use for this is a combination of Over the Cap for tracking which players left in free agency and airyards.com to see historically how many targets each departed player commanded. Add those numbers up and you have a target vacancy estimate. Quarterback quality is the single biggest landing spot variable, and it's the most straightforward to evaluate. A great quarterback makes every skill position player around him more valuable. He extends plays, he delivers accurate balls in tight windows, he gets his receivers the ball in rhythm. An elite quarterback paired with a talented rookie receiver can accelerate that receiver's dynasty value by 1 to 2 full years. The flip side is equally true. A receiver who lands behind a bad quarterback is going to see his dynasty value suppressed even if he's genuinely great, because the bad QB is going to miss him on deep routes, force throws into coverage, and cost the team efficiency that limits how often the offense even gets into scoring position. For dynasty purposes, I rate quarterbacks on a simple 1 to 10 scale. Elite, like a top 3 quarterback in the league, is a 10. A serviceable starter is a 6 or 7. A clear weak link is a 3 or 4. Every tier difference in QB quality is roughly worth half a dynasty round of rookie draft capital when evaluating a skill position player's immediate value. It matters less long term. Great players eventually get great quarterbacks, or great quarterbacks get drafted to them. But for years 1 and 2 of dynasty, QB quality is almost everything. The offensive coordinator and the scheme they run matters more than most dynasty managers account for. The specific number I look at is called pass rate over expected PROE, and you can find it for free at rbsdm.com. It tells you how much more or less frequently a team passes the ball compared to what game situation would predict. A team with a +8 PROE is passing significantly more than average, which means more total fantasy opportunities for skill players. A team with a negative PROE is running heavy, which caps the ceiling of every receiver on that roster no matter how talented they are. Beyond raw pass rate, scheme specifics matter too. Air raid and West Coast offenses generate huge target volume for slot receivers and tight ends. Run-heavy power offenses use their tight ends primarily as blockers, which crushes the dynasty value of even elite tight end prospects. When you hear people talk about offensive scheme fit, this is what they mean. Is the system going to force feed this player the ball, or is it going to use him as a chess piece in ways that minimize his fantasy impact? Section 4, bringing it all together by position. Because here's the thing, the same metric means something very different depending on the position you're evaluating. Let me give you the quick version for each positional group so you know exactly which numbers to prioritize when you're doing your own research. For wide receivers, Dominator Rating and Breakout Age are your anchors. These 2 college production metrics have the strongest correlation with long-term dynasty value at the position. If a wide receiver has a Dominator Rating above 30% and a Breakout Age under 20, you have a player who was the best receiver on his college team as a teenager. That profile has produced dynasty contributors at an extremely high rate historically. Layer in a RAS above 8.0 to confirm the athletic foundation, then evaluate landing spot for how quickly that value will show up. YPRR is your tiebreaker between 2 similarly profiled prospects. For running backs, landing spot is actually the first thing I look at, not the last. Because at running back, a great player in a committee backfield has less dynasty value than an average player with a clear bell cow role. Once the landing spot confirms a path to featured back work, I want to see pass catching ability, college reception totals, and target share, because the dynasty running backs with the longest careers are consistently the ones who can play all 3 downs. Then RAS at 40 time confirm whether the athleticism is there to sustain production. Dominator Rating matters, but it's harder to interpret at running back because some great backs were in systems that limited their opportunity, and some mediocre backs padded stats behind elite offensive lines. For tight ends, RAS is king above everything else. The position is so physically demanding that only freakish athletes survive long enough to become dynasty assets. If a tight end isn't at least an 8.0 on the RAS scale, the bar for their college production to overcome that has to be enormous. After RAS, landing spot and quarterback quality jump ahead of everything. The average top dynasty tight end doesn't hit their peak until year 3. Until recently, these past few years, we have seen excellent tight ends come into the league. Maybe the trend continues. If they land behind a bad quarterback or in a blocking-heavy scheme, it might never happen. College target share and YPRR tell you whether they were already a receiver in college or if they're being projected as one at the NFL level, which is a meaningful difference in timeline. For quarterbacks in Dynasty, and specifically in superflex formats where QB matters enormously, the starting timeline is the #1 factor above all college production metrics. A quarterback who sits behind a veteran starter for 2 years has essentially 0 dynasty value during that window. A quarterback who starts immediately, even on a mediocre team, is generating fantasy points from week 1. After confirming the starting timeline, adjusted completion percentage is the best predictor of accuracy and decision-making translating to the NFL. And rushing ability is the variable that separates good fantasy quarterbacks from great ones. The quarterback position has a fantasy ceiling that is dramatically higher when the player adds 400 to 600 rushing yards per season, and that rushing ability almost always shows up in college before it shows up in the NFL. So let's do a quick recap of everything we covered. RAS Score, composite athleticism from 0 to 10, 8 and above is very good. It's a floor predictor, not a ceiling predictor. 40-yard dash, look at it relative to position thresholds, not in isolation. Vertical jump, red zone, and contested catch ability. Short shuttle and three-cone, agility and route running longevity. Dominator rating, percentage of your team's total production you accounted for. 30% is the magic number. Breakout age, how old were you when you first dominated? Under 20 is the threshold. Target market share, did the quarterback trust you above everyone else on the field? YPRR. Pure per play efficiency, separates volume receivers from true playmakers. Target vacancies, how many unclaimed targets are waiting for the rookie on their new team? QB quality, the biggest landing spot variable, worth up to 2 dynasty tiers. Offensive scheme, does the system create opportunities and does it fit this player's skill set? Now that you know exactly what all of this means, we're going to put it to use. Our next video, we're going to evaluate prospects using these exact metrics. Every player we rank, you'll know precisely why they're where they are, because you just learned the framework. If you want to be ready for your rookie draft and actually understand the reasoning behind the rankings instead of just copying a list, subscribe right now and hit the bell. The next video will drop soon and you don't want to miss it heading into draft season. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Tell me which metric you've been hearing about but never fully understood before today. I read every single comment. See you in the next one.